Most people think retirement is a math problem. They believe the biggest question is whether they've saved enough money. They spend years staring at account balances, running calculators, checking investment statements, and asking the same question over and over, do I have enough? But after spending decades helping people prepare for retirement, I've discovered something surprising. The people who struggle the most in retirement are not always the people with the smallest portfolios. And the people who enjoy retirement the most are not always the people with the largest portfolios. In fact, I've watched retirees with millions of dollars live with constant anxiety, while others with far less money enjoy every day with confidence and peace. That tells us something important. The biggest obstacle to retirement isn't always financial, it's psychological. And until you understand this, you can spend years building wealth only to find yourself unable to enjoy it. Think about that for a moment. Imagine working 40 years. 40 years of early mornings, 40 years of deadlines, 40 years of sacrifices. 40 years of saying no to things you wanted so you could prepare for the future. Then one day you finally reach retirement, you have the money, you have the freedom, you have the time, and yet instead of feeling relieved, you feel terrified. Instead of feeling free, you feel trapped. Instead of enjoying what you built, you're afraid to touch it. I've seen this happen countless times, and I want to tell you a story. Years ago, my grandparents built a successful business from the ground up. They weren't born wealthy. Nobody handed them anything. They worked hard, took risks, and created a life they could be proud of. They traveled, they enjoyed themselves, they bought things they loved. They created memories. Then eventually they sold the business and retired. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But something unexpected happened. Almost overnight, their mindset changed. The vacations became less frequent. The spending slowed down. The experiences stopped. Not because they couldn't afford them, because they became afraid. Afraid of spending, afraid of running out, afraid that one bad decision might somehow destroy everything they had worked so hard to build. The money was still there, the fear was too. And that's when I realized something that changed how I view retirement forever. The fear of not having enough before retirement and the fear of spending too much after retirement are actually the same fear, they just wear different disguises. Before retirement, the fear says, keep working, keep saving, you're not ready yet, you need more. After retirement, that same fear changes its language. Now it says, don't spend that. What if you need it later? What if the market crashes? What if something goes wrong? Different words, same fear. And that's the trap. The cyber mindset that helped you build wealth becomes the very thing preventing you from enjoying it. For 40 years, your brain was rewarded for accumulation. Save more. Invest more, build more, delay gratification. That mindset was necessary. It helped create your financial success. But retirement requires a completely different skill, not accumulation. Distribution, not building, using, not saving, living. And most people never learn how to make that transition. So they stay stuck, one foot in the working years, one foot in retirement, never fully entering either world. The truth is that retirement is not simply a financial transition, it's an identity transition. For decades, your life followed a familiar pattern. You worked, you earned, you saved, you repeated the cycle. Then suddenly that structure disappears. And that can be scary, not because you're unprepared, because you're entering unfamiliar territory.
Human beings naturally fear uncertainty. We fear what we haven't experienced, and retirement is one of the biggest unknowns most people will ever face. But here's the good news. The retirees who thrive have figured something out. They stop waiting for certainty. They stop waiting for fear to disappear. And they start building something far more powerful. Proof. That's the first major shift. Confidence is not a feeling. Confidence is proof. Most people think confidence comes first. They think successful retirees wake up one morning and suddenly feel ready. That's not how it works. Nobody wakes up feeling completely prepared for a major life transition. Not retirement. Not marriage, not parenthood, not starting a business, not changing careers. Confidence doesn't arrive before action. Confidence is created by action. Think about your own career. When you first started, you probably felt nervous. You didn't know everything. You weren't certain.
You made mistakes, you learned lessons, you adjusted. And over time, something happened. You became confident. Why? Because you accumulated evidence. You proved to yourself that you could handle challenges. You proved you could solve problems. You proved you could adapt. That proof became confidence. Retirement works exactly the same way. The reason so many people never feel ready is because they're chasing a feeling instead of building evidence. They keep waiting for fear to disappear. Meanwhile, confident retirees understand a different truth. Fear may never disappear completely, but proof can become stronger than fear. And when that happens, everything changes. You stop asking, what if I fail, and start asking, based on everything I've already proven, why wouldn't I succeed? That shift alone changes the entire retirement experience, because now you're no longer depending on emotions, you're depending on evidence. And evidence is far more reliable than feelings. Feelings change every day. Proof remains. That's why the most successful retirees spend less time searching for reassurance and more time creating experiences that reinforce confidence. They understand something many people never learn. You don't think your way into confidence. You act your way into confidence. And once you understand that principle, every other retirement decision becomes easier. Let's talk about the second shift, because this is where retirement starts becoming real. Most people say they're worried they don't have enough money. But when you sit down and have an honest conversation, that's usually not the real fear. The real fear sounds more like this. What if the market crashes right after I retire? What if inflation gets worse? What if healthcare costs explode? What if I live longer than expected? What if something happens to my spouse? What if the first few years go badly? Now we're getting to the heart of the issue. The fear isn't the number. The fear is uncertainty. It's the fear that your plan only works when life behaves. And let's be honest, life rarely behaves exactly the way we want it to. Markets rise and fall. Unexpected expenses happen. Health challenges appear. Family situations change. That's reality. And your brain knows it. So if you've never tested your retirement plan against difficult situations, your mind will naturally treat retirement like a giant gamble. Imagine getting on an airplane. You ask the pilot if the aircraft has ever been tested. The pilot says, nope, we just assume it'll work. How comfortable would you feel? Not very. Yet that's exactly how many people approach retirement. They've looked at average scenarios, they've examined best case outcomes, but they've never looked closely at the difficult possibilities. And because they haven't, fear fills in the blanks. Here's what confident retirees do differently. They stress test the plan. Before they retire, they intentionally ask difficult questions. What happens if the market drops 20%? What happens if inflation remains high for several years? What happens if expenses increase unexpectedly? What happens if we spend more than planned during the first decade? What happens if one spouse passes away earlier than expected? These aren't pessimistic questions, they're practical questions. And every answer provides another layer of confidence. Every time the plan survives a difficult scenario, fear loses a little more power. I remember meeting with a couple years ago. Both were successful professionals. Both had saved diligently. On paper, they were more than prepared. Yet the husband refused to retire. Every year, he pushed retirement back another 12 months. Finally, I asked him a simple question. What specifically are you afraid of? He sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, I'm afraid the market will crash right after I stop working. That was it. Not 20 fears. One fear, one scenario. So we modeled it. We examined historical data. We stress tested their income plan. We explored multiple outcomes. And do you know what happened? The plan survived. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but it survived. And something remarkable happened. His fear began to shrink. Not because someone told him everything would be okay, because he had evidence. He had proof. He could see how the plan would respond. Retirement no longer felt like a leap into darkness. It felt like a calculated decision. That's a huge difference. One comes from hope. The other comes from preparation, and preparation creates peace. The third shift might be the most powerful exercise I've ever seen for future retirees. In fact, if you only remember one idea from this entire discussion, remember this one. Practice retirement before retirement. Most people spend decades preparing financially for retirement. Very few prepare emotionally, very few prepare behaviorally. And that's a mistake. Think about athletes. Nobody shows up on game day without training. Nobody runs a marathon without practice. Nobody learns to swim by jumping into the ocean for the first time. Yet millions of people retire without ever practicing retirement. Then they wonder why it feels uncomfortable. Here's what I encourage people to do. 6 months to 2 years before retirement, start living on your retirement budget. Not a theoretical budget, a real one. If your retirement plan says you'll spend a certain amount each month, begin living on that amount while you're still working. Continue receiving your paycheck. Continue earning income. But only spend what your retirement budget allows. Save the difference, invest the difference, pay down debt with the difference. Just don't spend it. At first it feels strange. Then something interesting happens. You begin collecting evidence that your lifestyle works, evidence that your spending assumptions are realistic, evidence that you can live comfortably within the framework you've created. The guessing disappears because now you're not imagining retirement, you're experiencing it. But there's another step that's even more important. While you're still working, begin withdrawing money from retirement accounts as practice. Now, before anybody panics, talk with your advisor about tax implications and timing. But the concept is important. You need experience seeing money move in the opposite direction. Because for decades, you've only known one direction. Money comes in, savings grow, balances increase, accounts rise, retirement changes the flow. Now money comes out. And for lifelong savers, that can feel emotionally uncomfortable.
The first time many retirees see a withdrawal hit their account, their heart rate increases. Suddenly, decades of conditioning activate. Their brain says, wait a minute, we're not supposed to do this. We're supposed to save. We're supposed to build. That's the saver mindset talking. And while that mindset helped create financial success, it can become a prison if you never learn to move beyond it. Practicing withdrawals while you're still employed gives you a chance to experience that discomfort safely. You still have a paycheck, you still have income, you still have security. But now you're training your brain for the next chapter. You're teaching yourself that spending isn't failure, using your money isn't failure, retirement income isn't failure. It's the purpose of the plan. I can't tell you how many people have experienced a dramatic reduction in anxiety after practicing this process. Not because they accumulated more money,
because they accumulated more proof, and proof changes everything. The fourth shift requires a completely different way of looking at money. For decades, you've probably viewed spending as subtraction. Every purchase reduced your balance. Every dollar spent meant one less dollar available. That's logical, it's mathematically correct. But retirement requires a new perspective, because spending in retirement isn't the opposite of saving, it's the purpose of saving. Read that again. Spending in retirement isn't the opposite of saving. It's the reason you saved in the first place. You didn't build wealth so you could admire account statements. You built wealth so you could create freedom. You built wealth so you could have choices. You built wealth so you could spend your time the way you wanted. Yet many retirees continue viewing every dollar spent as a loss. And that's where guilt comes from. That's where hesitation comes from. That's where fear lives. The solution is surprisingly simple. Stop focusing exclusively on where the money is leaving. Start focusing on where the money is going. Instead of saying, we spent $12,000 on travel, say we created memories in Italy. Instead of saying, we spent money visiting family, say we spent a week with grandchildren we'll never get back. Instead of saying, we paid for a class, say we learned something we've wanted to learn for 20 years. Money is only a tool. The real value exists in what the money creates, the experiences, the relationship, the opportunities, the memories, the impact. When spending becomes connected to purpose, guilt begins to disappear, because now you're not watching money leave, you're watching life happen. And that's an entirely different emotional experience. The happiest retirees I've ever met understand this intuitively. They don't spend recklessly, they're not careless, they're intentional. Every dollar has a destination, every expenditure serves a purpose, every withdrawal supports a meaningful life. And because they know exactly what the money is accomplishing, they don't feel guilty using it, they feel grateful. That's a powerful distinction. The fifth shift is one that surprises almost everyone, and frankly, it's one of the hardest lessons for disciplined savers to accept. You need a vision that's bigger than the money. Let me explain. For most of your working life, the goal was clear: save, invest, build, prepare. The scoreboard was easy to read, your net worth increased, your accounts grew, your investments appreciated, progress was visible. Then retirement arrives and suddenly the scoreboard changes. Now the question isn't, how much have I accumulated? The question becomes, what am I doing with the life I've created? And that's where many people get stuck, because they've spent decades building the financial plan, but almost no time building the life plan. They know how much money they have, they don't know what they want their days to look like. They know their withdrawal rate, they don't know their purpose, they know their investment allocation, they don't know what excites them anymore. Retirement isn't simply leaving work. Retirement is stepping into a new season of life. And if you don't have a compelling vision for that season, fear naturally takes over. Why? Because human beings need direction. We need purpose. We need something meaningful pulling us forward. Without that, our minds default to protection mode. We become cautious, we become hesitant, we become overly focused on preserving rather than living. I've seen this happen over and over. Someone spends 40 years dreaming about retirement, then retirement arrives. For the first few months, it feels wonderful. No alarm clock, no meetings, no deadlines, no pressure. Then eventually something unexpected happens. They begin asking themselves, now what? And that's when the emotional challenges start. Because retirement was never meant to be simply the absence of work. It was meant to be the presence of something better, something meaningful, something worth waking up for. The retirees who thrive understand this. They don't retire from something, they retire to something. Maybe it's travel, maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's mentoring younger people, Maybe it's serving in their community. Maybe it's spending more time with family. Maybe it's finally pursuing interests they postponed for decades. Whatever it is, they have a destination, and destination changes everything. Think about driving. A long drive can feel exhausting if you don't know where you're going. But when you're headed somewhere exciting, the same distance feels completely different. Retirement works the same way. When there's no destination, spending feels scary. When there's a destination, spending feels purposeful. I worked with a gentleman who spent years terrified of retirement. Every conversation revolved around money. Every concern involved his portfolio. Every question centered around risk. Finally, during one meeting, I asked him something different. What are you most excited about doing when you retire? He sat quietly, then he laughed, and he said, honestly, I've never thought about it. Think about that. He had spent decades planning the financial side of retirement, yet he had never planned the life itself. So we started talking, not about investments, not about returns, not about market performance, about life, about dreams, about experiences, about relationships, about things he wanted to do while he still had the health and energy to do them. And slowly something changed. The conversation shifted away from fear. Because now retirement wasn't just about protecting money. It was about using money to support something meaningful. That shift transformed everything. The sixth and final shift is the one that ultimately brings freedom. And it begins with accepting a truth most people spend years resisting. You will never feel completely ready. Never. Not fully, not perfectly, not with absolute certainty. And that's okay. In fact, that's normal. Think about every major decision you've ever made. Were you completely certain when you got married? Probably not. Were you completely certain when you became a parent? Definitely not. Were you completely certain when you accepted the job that changed your career? Of course not. Every meaningful chapter of life involves uncertainty. Every important decision requires faith. Every major transition includes fear. Retirement is no different. Yet many people hold retirement to a standard they never applied anywhere else. They expect complete certainty. They expect all fear to disappear. They expect some magical moment where every question is answered and every doubt vanishes. That moment doesn't exist. And waiting for it can cost you years. Years you can never get back. One of the saddest things I've witnessed throughout my career is watching people postpone life because they're waiting for certainty. They delay retirement by 1 year, then another, then another. Not because they need to, because they're waiting to feel ready. The problem is that readiness isn't a feeling, it's a decision supported by preparation. At some point, you have to trust the work you've done. You have to trust the planning. You have to trust the evidence. You have to trust yourself. That's what confident retirees do. They don't eliminate fear. They move forward despite it. They understand that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is acting while fear is present. And when you've built enough proof, fear loses its ability to control you. It may still ride in the passenger seat, but it no longer gets to drive. That's an important distinction. Because many people spend years trying to eliminate fear, instead learn to manage it, learn to understand it, learn to recognize that fear often appears whenever you're about to enter something meaningful. Fear isn't always a warning sign. Sometimes it's simply a reminder that you're stepping into unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory is where growth happens. It's where freedom happens. It's where life happens. Looking back, I often think about my grandparents, wonderful people, hardworking people, successful people, people who earned every bit of the retirement they created. Yet they carried fear into a season that should have been filled with freedom. Nobody taught them how to make the transition. Nobody taught them that saving and spending required different mindsets. Nobody taught them how to trust what they had built. And because of that, they missed opportunities, they missed experiences, they missed moments that can never be replaced. That's why this message matters so much, because retirement isn't just about money, it's about life. Money is simply the tool. Life is the goal. The trips, the conversations, the memories, the grandchildren, the adventures, the laughter, the relationships. Those are the things that matter. Those are the things you'll remember. Those are the things that make retirement worthwhile. And the retirees who understand this seem to age differently, not physically, emotionally. They carry less anxiety, less guilt, less hesitation. They smile more, they engage more, they live more because they've learned something powerful. They've learned that wealth is not measured by how much money you keep. It's measured by how much life your money helps create. So if you've been waiting for the perfect moment to retire, hear this clearly. Stop waiting for certainty. Stop waiting for fear to disappear. Stop waiting for some magical feeling of readiness. Instead, focus on building proof. Stress test your plan. Practice living on your retirement budget. Learn how to withdraw money confidently. Connect your spending to meaningful experiences. Create a vision for the life you want, and then trust the work you've done, because confidence isn't something you find, it's something you build, one decision at a time, one experience at a time, one piece of evidence at a time, and eventually something remarkable happens. You stop asking whether you're ready. You start realizing you've been ready for a lot longer than you thought. That's when retirement changes. That's when